Hello, sir.
Good morning to everybody.
Good morning, sir. So, sir, today, good morning to all of you. Today, we have Professor Avijit Pathak from JNU with us, and we are conducting a interview for our magazine Folkways. Our Socioforum team will conduct. These are my Socioforum member.
Okay.
Yashita is the president, Deshna Jain, Anjali, Chaviyatri, Janvi, Shukla, Rajakshika, and Mehak and Haya. They are working for Socioforum. And so Yashita will introduce everything. Yashita, please.
A very warm good morning to everyone. I know it's cold out there, so very warm good morning. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Shashwat Kumar that he gave us this opportunity to take interview of Professor Avijit Pathak. Sir, I am Yashita Gupta, the president of Department of Sociology, Sociisoforum. Further, I would like to introduce what Sociisoforum is. Sociisoforum is basically a place where the girls, girl students, which means socis, discuss about sociology in general, and we try to implement sociological theories and our understanding of sociology and help students in better understanding of the subject that we have understood or trying to understand.
Right.
Further, I would like to welcome you all to our cover interview for first edition of our annual magazine, Folkways. About Folkways, all of you can read on our blog website and Instagram. Today we have among us Dr. Avijit Pathak, whose detailed introduction actually requires a session of its own. But I'll briefly mention his endless works and achievements. The newest recipient of the Malcolm Adisesi Award, Professor Pathak recently retired as a professor at Center for Studies of Social Systems, JNU. His areas of interest include sociology of modernization, social theory, and sociology of education. He has teaching experience of more than 31 years. He has written quite a number of books on education, pedagogy, modernity, and many such topics, which include The Rhythm of Life and Death, Modernity, Globalization, and Identity Towards a Reflexive Quest, to name a few. Apart from this, he writes for journalist pages and newspapers like The Wire, Indian Express, Mainstream Weekly, The Hindu, among many. On behalf of Sociisoforum, I welcome you with warm regards. Today,
Thank you.
For the briefing about today's interview, it is divided into 3 segments. The first segment will be interviewed by our hardworking content creator, Disha. The second segment will be covered by our jolly technical head, Deshna. And the last segment will be covered by our multi-talented content head, Janvi. I hope you all are set to start. Disha, you are good to go.
Okay, just before that, Shashwat, thank you. And it's great to meet all these, your students and these fresh young minds. And in the life of a teacher, nothing matters more than the experience of constant learning from students like you. So thank you very much. My best wishes, and stay safe, take care, and excel in whatever you pursue and do, and celebrate your learning. Celebrate your learning. You have teacher like Shashwat who engages you so deeply, and I hope that your journey with the discipline would be quite meaningful. Some of you might be in academics, some of you might take up different job, but sociology as a subject, with its reflexivity, with its criticality, with its awareness, that would always be with you throughout your life, no matter what vocation you choose. So these 3 to 4 years in college life, celebrate it and enjoy it and learn and unlearn. So eager to learn from you. Yes, carry on.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, hello, Disha. Yes.
Good morning, sir. I am Disha Gautam, your host for the first segment. It is our first meeting with you, so there is a feeling of ecstasy with a little hint of nervousness, but the nervousness is gone now. And it is a pleasure and a privilege to have you here with us. We have so many questions that we would like to ask you. In your articles and in your previous interview that we have seen, you have shared so much wisdom, sir. Something that really intrigued me was the start of all of this. And hence, I thought that would be a great way to frame our discussion, some conversation. So, I would like to ask you about your early career. Sir, you have been in academia for decades now. Your journey must have been full of ebbs and flows. So, please share with us how you see your journey as a professor and more as a scholar.
Thank you very much. I joined my university as a faculty way back in 1990 and just retired. So more than 31 years is a long journey. And one thing I always feel and share it with my friends and students that I'm lucky in the sense that I have found a vocation that for 31 years became my meditation, became my play. I enjoyed every moment of it. I celebrated it, and I continually learned and unlearned from all that I was doing. And generation of students, bright students, thoughtful students, and as a teacher, you learn so much from your students. And learning is always a very collaborative experience. We travel together, walk together, raise questions, problematize the world, and entire experience. And that's why the question that you have raised, it was a wonderful journey. It was a wonderful journey. And there's a lot of inner fulfillment, creative satisfaction. And when you completely equate it with your vocation, then it's a moment of happiness. Because most of the time in our life, what happens that there is a gap between what you do for your livelihood and what you actually like to do, and that is what causes a lot of stress and alienation. You are not happy in your work sphere, but you have to do it because you have to earn the money. But in my case, I wanted to be a teacher, and I wanted to be in the domain of ideas. And so I'm lucky, fortunate that what I liked, that also gave me the source of my livelihood. So there was no contradiction between work and play, creativity and work. So every morning coming to the university was like, getting yourself ready for another wonderful day, another beautiful day. You would meet young students, you would take them to the realm of ideas, you would go to the library, come to the library cafeteria, talk with students, engage in debate, reflection, read books, share ideas. And it's a wonderful journey. It was
For your vocation. This brings me to my next question, that what were the reasons that you chose sociology? Because, and as you entered this field, what were the challenges that you faced?
okay. That before we answer this question, it's like very important for all of us to understand, and especially as you are growing up, it is important to understand that our human life, the trajectory of life, is never very unilinear and straightforward. It has its surprises, it has its wonder. It's not that like a computer program, you could be planned. So many things happen in life, and so in our life, I think it is very important to be receptive and to be open to the new surprises and new experiences. Say, for instance, my entry into the discipline as a student, Unlike you, I didn't do my graduation in sociology. I was a student of physics, in Kolkata. I loved that subject, but it was also because of the process of growing up in the mid and late 70s in a city like Kolkata. And that led to a lot of inner churning, in the sense that you come to know a lot of things about politics, about different kind of movement taking place. Our childhood, we grew up with a lot of understanding about Vietnam War, American imperialism, things of that kind. So certain kind of social political consciousness was constantly haunting your mind, even though professionally, academically, I was doing a theoretical science. And then also, for example, the good theater, good cinema, growing up with the cinema of great masters like Charlie Chaplin, Satyajit Ray, Mrinal Sen, Shyam Benegal, and great theater, and of course, the great literature. Now, all that generated a deep interest in human society, its culture, its politics, the way the society functions, you know. And in that process, I was thinking that possibly it is giving me a call. Now, from the natural sciences, I should come to social sciences and the humanities. And, and I heard a great deal from Kolkata about this university, about JNU. JNU came into being in the late 60s. So when we came to the JNU at its early stage, not exactly early, just 9 to 10 years, heard a great deal about that place. So I thought that let me try, and meanwhile I read a lot of books in Bengali on political philosophy, social philosophy, and all that. And I thought that let me come to JNU. And that's the way I came to JNU. And I joined as a postgraduate student here in sociology. And great professors, great professors who taught us. And apart from that, what we learned in the classroom, the entire ambience of the place, because learning takes place in many places, not just in the classroom through the official curriculum and the syllabus. It takes place in many places. It takes place in the library, in the cafeteria, in lot of when you participate in lot of debate, discussions, workshops, and other. So all that was enriching us. And slowly the interest in social sciences, sociology, political philosophy, social philosophy, that emerged, that possessed me, and I just entered into that ocean. And I loved that, that entry into that domain.
To your words, sir, like it looks like that you have had quite a journey, and your love for sociology made you embrace the challenges that you faced. I, as someone studying social science, would like to ask you, as someone teaching social science, that why the students studying humanities at a higher educational level are considered less intelligent and less classy in the eyes of the society. Being more generic here, sir, why my BA degree is looked down upon by the society?
Right. I think it's a very good question, and it's an important question to ask. A lot of youngsters who join humanities and social sciences ask this question. And I think that since you are doing social science, in order to respond to that question, we have to go somewhat deeper if we want to respond to that question meaningfully. There is a politics of knowledge and curriculum. There is a politics of knowledge and curriculum. And that politics of knowledge and curriculum, you and I cannot adequately comprehend unless we relate it to the larger political economy of the society that governs the society. Now, for example, take a simple illustration. that, say, for instance, when India became independent, after the prolonged struggle for decolonization, India became independent. And Jawaharlal Nehru at the helm of affairs and the prime minister of the country. And then you could see that what was the project of the nation making at that time. And that project of the nation making was that India ought to modernize, industrialize, and it needs a lot of help of economists, scientists, planners through the Planning Commission. And also India ought to sharpen the ethics of cultural pluralism and syncretism. So a lot of writings in different languages, Malayalam, Hindi, Tamil, Bengali, Urdu, all have to be translated into different other languages. So you could see that under this regime, on the one hand, the IITs came into being because you need technologists and scientists. And then also, for example, a lot of universities, where you need great social scientists, economists, historians, and others, and a lot of academies, Sahitya Academy and others, all that came into being. So when you see that canvas of knowledge, then you could see that it was like, for example, deeply related to the idea of a new nation that seek to modernize itself and create certain kind of secular foundation with certain kind of plurality of cultures. And as a result, you need artists, you need literary figures, you need scientists, you need technologists, you need good public universities as well as the Institute of Technology and others. So those were the primary thing at that time. And as a result, orientation to the different knowledges became. The world that you are living in right now, post-1990s, and especially now, in that world, as many social philosophers and educationists would argue, here the ethos of neoliberalism and the very aggressive neoliberal market-driven capitalism, that seems to have shaped our consciousness, and that seems to have shaped the agenda of education. And there was a great Black American sociologist of education called Michael Appel. He wrote extensively on that. And there was another Canadian-American social scientist called Henry Giro. They wrote extensively on that, what the neoliberalism did to education. And it created a very strange hierarchy of knowledge tradition. Now it regarded only that knowledge is useful, relevant, which would generate certain kind of technical skills for transforming you into a resource to be manipulated for the corporate workforce. As a result, you could see all sorts of institutes coming, hotel management, information technology. Today, hardly you would find someone who is trying to become a mechanical engineer or electrical engineer. No matter what discipline he does, ultimately end up in the information technology, So technology, management, all those knowledges, technical skills, which the market needs, which the corporate needs. So placement and the salary package and the techno-managerial knowledge and skill, that acquired great importance. So it created a hierarchy. On the one hand of your BTech management, then your natural sciences, and then it led to the liberal arts, humanities, and social sciences. Because the argument was that society needs not Romila Thapar or Irfan Habib or Prabhat Patnaik. The market needs a techno manager. Market needs that, because all branches of knowledge have to be evaluated in terms of its market value. You are your placement and salary package. You are not your consciousness. You are not a living soul. You are essentially a product. And Marx wrote it very beautifully, even in the early phase of capitalism, when you must have read in sociology what Marx wrote in Capital Volume 1, Commodity Fetishism. When you and I are reduced into mere object and commodities, and the relationship between human beings look like object thing. So take an illustration. The other day, in a market, I saw a youngster like you wearing a t-shirt, and on the back it is written, "My father is my ATM," So I felt that one day the father would wear the t-shirt and where it would be written, "My son or daughter is my investment," So the relationship is now, and this is what many social scientists argue, that even in the most intimate domain of family, the market has entered in such a big way. Market has entered in such a big way. And it is this colonization by the market that creates that notion. But when you see in terms of ideas, do you feel, can it ever be hierarchized that who is more superior, Rabindranath Tagore or Dostoevsky or Albert Einstein? All are excelling in their different domains. Who is more intelligent, Romila Thapar or, for example, a IIT professor? Now, both are excellent in their own domains, but the market is filtering. Market is saying, no, this branch of knowledge is more relevant, more important. And that is where you see that throughout the world, not only in India, there was a growing attack on liberal arts, humanities, and the devaluation of liberal arts and humanities. And very unfortunately, this hierarchy is being created right from school days. For example, schools very mechanically allot disciplines. When you come to class 11, it is assumed that those who have got better marks are necessarily inclined to science, and those who have not got so much are necessarily inclined to humanities. It is quite possible that I have cracked the exam strategy and I have got 100 out of 100 in physics, but essentially my heart is in the domain of history, in the domain of poetry. But school would think that, no, since I have got 100 out of 100 in physics, naturally I should be in science. And it is quite possible that a young person, who might not have scored so well in physics in the exam, but very experimental, thinks scientifically. There is a lot of scientific question that is bothering in his mind, but the school would not give him science. And a very strange, superficial, mechanized, bureaucratized ways of classification and placing students. Together with that, the parental pressure. Most of us come from the middle-class families, and in a highly populated country like ours, where there is a huge gap between the number of aspirants and the resources. So parents suffer from the acute anxiety, and this parental anxiety, they seek to impose on the child. Oh, if you do history, your life will be hell. Why don't you go to Kota and somehow manage to, be it through capitation fee or others, manage to get an entry into any of this engineering management college? Why to waste life doing history or philosophy or social science in Delhi University? That's the dominant common sense. And that's why that you are feeling today through the peer, through the family, through the society around that. But as you are studying social science, and I believe that is where it should give you the clarity. It has got nothing to do with your talent. It has got nothing to do with your capacity. It is a market that is speaking through that. And when you understand it deeply, then you would acquire the courage, you would stand up. And someone who tells you that why you are doing sociology, not hotel management or fashion designing or information technology, that could have given you immediately better job and the placement and salary package, you then get the confidence, look eye to eye and say that it is the market that is speaking through you. It is the market that is speaking through you. And it is essentially, learning is about celebration of awareness critical consciousness, and what is important is my inner fulfillment. And if I am fulfilled with what I am pursuing, and I too would find my path, would find my vocation. So look at it clearly, acquire certain kind of self-worth and self-confidence. It's a long battle, but you have to constantly fight it.
Absolutely true, sir. Your reference to politics of knowledge and neoliberalism, the capitalism, the parental pressure, and the market myths, and the emphasis on the inner fulfillment that we should get from a subject, it definitely gave us a new perspective. And this will surely is a good argument to win a science versus humanities debate. It made us look at social sciences in a new light today. Sir, while my previous question was about a journal challenge that was faced by the humanities students, I'll be more personal with my next question, if you allow me. Sir,
Yeah.
what was your family's reaction when you quit sciences and took up arts? Because arts is not given that much respect in the society, and it's a girl's discipline.
Yeah. No, I think that it's a good question, and you should ask this question. You know, that there was a certain kind of difference in the process of the growing up of our generation and your generation. Sometimes I feel that India has changed in such a big way, and the middle class values have changed in such a big way. When we were growing up, you know, that it's like that, you see that it was a very slow growth rate. And the economists used to call it that India's growth rate remains 3.5% or something like that. And, you know, that we passed through that. We grew up without television. Then at one time, the Doordarshan channel, black and white television for 2 hours came. Then slowly, cable television came, color television came, mobile came, smartphone came, internet came. And India also changed rapidly from 1990s with the market, with neoliberalism, and many of these things. So when we grew up, then things were much more slow. Things were much more slow. And I believe that it played a wonder, you know. And I grew up in a very small town. And there was only one thing, and it's a huge family. There was only one thing that we learned, and the parents told that, you know, that do whatever you like and study. You know, there is a great importance to study. And would often be told, an illustration would be given, you know, and sometimes they would say that, see, this fellow has got a lot of money, but if you go to the house of that person, you would hardly find any good book there. But what would sustain you is your great book, great ideas, you know, and do whatever you pursue. And there was not so much fear and anxiety centered on that you have to take up this job right now, you have to earn so much and all that. That confidence we got. And as a result, that from when science to humanities I came, and I told my parents, and there was only one thing that my parents told, that do whatever you like, whatever satisfies you, whatever fulfills you, and we trust you, you know, and that I think is enough, you know, that I think is enough, because if you get that trust from your parents, you know, then you can fight many battles, you know, and that I think that all those things were not there. Today, your generation would not believe. Today, even before the child is born, you know, child is in the womb of the mother. The parents have already decided that the child would take up information technology in IIT. The child has not yet been born. You know, so our time was not like that. You know, when I see the pathology today, you ask a child of 4-year-old that you have to be like this. How does the child know? Let the child unfold itself. Eventually, one would know whether it is rose or lotus or a blue flower. It is. Let it allow to grow. It's like that bulldozer. You're trying to fit everybody into a very same stereotype. And that is destroying so many possibilities, A rose is a rose. It cannot be lotus. A lotus is a lotus. It cannot be a rose, and that I think is very, very important. And that's why I would urge you, trust your uniqueness, trust your own aptitude and like. You need not be like somebody else. The potential that you have, your own specificity, allow it to unfold itself. And our ultimate happiness lies in, the happiness of the rose is like becoming a rose and radiating its fragrance. So your happiness is like your own inner flowering, your own inner flowering. You need not be like anybody else. That I think is very important.
Definitely, sir. Very well said. That a rose is a rose and a lotus is a lotus. That was quite a story, and it was so nice of your parents to show that support in your education. Sir, with each passing answer, this conversation is getting more and more interesting, which leads me to ask that in a world full of people lacking common sense, how can we popularize a discipline whose basic requirement is to think beyond common sense? And sir, what is your definition of common sense?
First, I'll try to respond to this question at two ways. One is methodological, philosophical, and another is political. Now, you see that when you say, for example, you are studying sociology or history or theoretical sciences, and when you learn it through a pedagogic practice called critical pedagogy, then what happens? What is critical pedagogy? Say what the proponents of critical pedagogy. So immediately one name that would come to your mind is a person like Paulo Freire. That what Paulo Freire wrote a very beautiful book called The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. So Paulo Freire said, to put it very simply, generally our conventional system of learning is very one-dimensional. Teacher comes almost like a tape recorder, repeats what is written in the prescribed textbook, conduct exam, grades, ranks, hierarchizes the students, and it ends there. Classrooms are not vibrant. Classrooms are not dialogic. And it is assumed that the students are passive. They would just receive everything, that the teacher is saying. This is what he called banking education. As opposed to that, he said, critical dialogic education, where the teacher listens to students, students' voices, students' thinking, students' reflection. And then the teacher and the student collectively problematize the world and trying to make sense of the world, explore the world. So I'll just give you an illustration. Imagine you are in class 9, 10, and a very conventional teacher came and who told you that, children, now your civics textbook or the political science textbook, this is the chapter on fundamental rights in the Constitution. And next day I will take an exam and you have to mechanically, like a parrot, memorize what are these fundamental rights. And you just vomit it, it ends there. But then, as opposed to that, another dialogic teacher came in a very Paulo Freire way. Now, he introduces fundamental right and just suppose say right to equality. Now, then he asks that, children, just look at the world around you. Do you actually see equality? You just come out of your house, you see that it's a society full of inequality, institutionalized inequality, patriarchy, caste, such mind-boggling differences between the rich and the poor. Where is that equality? The security guard who stands in front of the mall, who is checking your phone and everything, possibly even when he is working for 20 days, technically everybody can enter the mall. and go to the food plaza, but just when you see that, is it ever possible for the security guard? Technically, he can go, but is it ever possible for that security guard to go to a fancy counter in a mall and buy French perfume for his daughter? Now, it's not possible. So then the teacher says that, is the Constitution a finished product, or is it a constant process that you and I constantly have to fight for the freedom? Freedom is not there simply because it is written there is a right to freedom. Then what happens? That your engagement becomes different. And then you ask critical questions. You begin to question many of these things. You begin to see that although technically we have abolished untouchability, but it is everywhere. Stigma, hierarchy, everywhere. You see that we say that it's a secular country, and then you see the might of majoritarianism. So then you ask a lot of critical questions, and that critical pedagogy enables you to go beyond the dominant ideology. And the dominant ideology, as Marx said very beautifully, that tend to appear like the common sense of the age. But it is socially constructed. But we are told that it is the fundamental truth. But it's not the truth. It hides many reality. It hides many contradictions. So that is what I think critical pedagogy helps you to question many things. Philosophically and methodologically, also this question has to be handled. Say, for example, and this is what phenomenologists, as you would be studying, say that, for example, that the world that you and I live in, and the phenomenologist says our everyday world that we take for granted, our paramount reality. So you and I, as subjects, we are not robots. You and I, as subjects, have certain notions about that world, certain concepts of the world through which you and I enter. So it's like saying that when you come to the classroom, teacher and the student, they have already defined the classroom in certain way, and everyday classroom functions on the basis of that shared understanding of the reality. So it's like saying that suppose one day your teacher comes to the classroom and suddenly he begin to dance like, Govinda in the 70s film, the classroom, the taken for granted world of the classroom would collapse, because it is assumed that the teacher comes, talks to student, initiates the discussion, and the teacher assumes that the students are attentive, students are listening to the teacher. That's the world we take for granted. Now, no sociologist could understand the classroom unless the sociologists understand the taken for granted world that the students and the teachers have taken. And so begins with that dominant notion, common sense, and then slowly goes deeper into it. So that is where I think that creative dialectic between your critical consciousness, critical thinking, and the way you and I take the world for granted with certain dominant notion. That is where the dialectic plays. And the libertarian pedagogy, critical pedagogy, emancipatory education enables you to problematize many given notions. For example, your earlier question, it is only with the critical pedagogy you understand that there is no point in saying that humanities is inferior to technical sciences, because this is a construct of a particular economy, of the neoliberalism. And now with my critical consciousness, I understand it. I do not see it as the fundamental truth. I see it that how it has been constructed. And then I can go beyond that. And that is what I think that one of the important functions of the critical thinking, critical pedagogy, and the critical school.
Yes, we as students will also definitely try to be more critical. uh, this really took me by surprise because we as sociology students also never have thought about this relation between sociology and common sense. Moving on, everyone here present knows for a fact that in school we are taught to run after marks. Our college admissions depends on our marks. For say, their university announced very high cutoffs, like 100% was set as the limit. But that was not the limit for students because they scored in hundreds. Now the question that comes up is that earlier we were judged for our marks, but this time students will be judged because they got free marks, come free admission. Like earlier, students were judged for their marks
Okay,
because when we get admission, we get them on our marks. But
right.
this time, like during the pandemic, students are judged because they got the free marks without giving exams. Earlier, it was only marks which judged us. Now it was the free marks that will judge us.
Remarks means?
Free marks means students did not give exams during the pandemic and they
Okay.
got the marks because of their assignments and all, and students got very high marks and they got admission in the top university. That is, they got the free admission, they did not work hard for it.
I think that I would respond to this question in this way. You know that as our academic bureaucracy, uh, uh, those who run our colleges and the universities, academic bureaucracy didn't fail to respond to the challenges to education that the pandemic raised, and that is where that entire problem lies. Now, the pandemic, what was the pandemic and what you and I are experiencing for last 2 years? The world that we are familiar with, our very known world, that has crumbled, that has collapsed, So we live amid constant fear of being infected, fear of death, loss, insulation, tremendous crisis in human relationships, anxiety. We are all passing through that at the time of the pandemic. Now, what the academic bureaucracy did, academic bureaucracy responded to it in a very technical and mechanical way. They thought that Google Meet and Zoom is the only answer to it. So they thought that everything would go on as usual. Instead of the face-to-face classroom, it would be online. The same assignment would be given, the same book would be taught, the same exam would be conducted. And as a result, what it failed to realize that the world has changed completely. Now, how can you teach at the time of the pandemic and ask your student that write a term paper on Rampura village as M.N. Srinivas depicted in his book? M.N. Srinivas didn't see pandemic. M.N. Srinivas didn't see the changes that we are passing through. And suppose the teacher is dealing with a student with a poor connectivity internet, and that student is in a remote village of Bihar, and that student has said that the villagers from Surat have walked during that journey, migration, and that worker shifted. And they worked because they lost job at the time of pandemic. And they thought that at least if they come to the village, that even if they do not get food, that there would be someone would be there if they die. And they entered that. And even when they entered that village, the panchayat and the villagers are asking for 10 days, you need not come into the heartland of the village. You be there. Now that student is saying a completely different cultural, social landscape of the village at the time of the pandemic. And hardly we imagine a different kind of education that would sensitize students at the time of the pandemic. Instead, what we did, we kept on repeating the same thing, the same syllabus, the same exam, the same book, and that too online. As a result, that you just see, today we talk about learning loss, but nobody is saying that whether there could have been some learning gain. Isn't it that at the most worst time in human existence, You learn the most important lessons that under normal circumstances you tend to negate, you tend to deny. And what we did, we are asking a child, class 6 child, for example, who might have seen mother infected with the COVID positive, father lost the job. And our teachers are saying, no, at this time, he must know how to draw the area of a trapezium, or what are the 10 reasons for the downfall of the Mughal Empire, that he has to learn. And if he, because of the poor internet connectivity, failed to do it, then we call it learning loss. But maybe that child has gained many things during that time. The child has actually understood that what the heightened social inequality is all about. The child has understood how the public health system works in this country and why there is no oxygen cylinder, but our education system is completely insensitive to that. We are talking about learning loss of what? Loss of that official curriculum. But that official curriculum has lost much of its meaning at this time. We could not redefine it. And that's why these things are coming, that whether the student who has not attended the online classes is getting marks, getting assignment and all that, that is coming. And another reason why it is coming is that our education system is terribly pathological and so much obsessed with the quantification, with the scale, with the measurement, that it refuses to engage with the mode of learning, which is beyond that quantification and the measurement, And imagine that's why how many parents during the CBSE exam, first time when the COVID came, many parents, they know that if CBSE conduct exam, the children are states and all that health issue. But many parents said, no, the exam immediately have to be conducted. Why parents are saying? Because parents too are schooled, grew up with a belief that there is only one way your learning can be evaluated, that is through CBSE marks. As if there is no other learning, as if there is no other learning, and that is the only way. And because it happens, because we live in a society where standardized, centralized exams have colonized the domain of education and learning. Education has become only about standardized tests and exams, and that's why the real issue of learning thing is come. And that's why I think as sociology students, you should talk to your teacher like Shashwat and say that why nobody speaks of learning gain. Everybody speaks of learning loss. We learned many things at this time of the pandemic, which no book taught us, no official syllabus taught us. And neither the CBSE nor the Delhi University nor JNU can take exam on that, So that is where I think new kind of questions that you people would raise.
Absolutely, sir. Your emphasis that we should have changed our teaching methodologies, but we kept on repeating the same methods and the same curriculum. It was insightful. And your answer also made us realize that there is no correlation between one's intellectual ability and one's performance in board examination.
Right.
Yeah. So moving on. So today I have the sources and the hindsight to look back and identify that I was in a rat race of marks. Without really focusing on the importance of real education, I was running after marks. Nevertheless, talking about the sources that taught me the meaning of real education were some of my seniors and my professors. And this highlights the importance of a role of a teacher. Currently, the Indian education system is messed up. It has become more about memory power, and it fails to address the needs of children who have different ways of learning. The coaching gurus taking advantage of this are selling education as a product.
Right.
What according to you should students do, and what can be the role of a teacher in changing the system?
I think that what is happening because of a terribly exam obsessed education, and that too very MCQ-centric standardized tests and exams, what has happened that it has led to, that when economics talk about the black economy, in our country, there is a black education. And the coaching centers symbolize that black education. And that's why, for example, every lane and by-lane of a small town and the city is full of coaching centers. And the irony is that some of the political parties' election agenda, they do it. For example, in Bihar, the political parties during the election did see the pathology of the agenda, that Patna would become the new Kota. Kota should repel every sensitive person. Kota represents all that is black about our education. It's just a commercialized coaching centers exploiting the parental anxiety and the kind of standardized MCQ pattern of mass scale test for eliminating large number of people that we have created, and the anxiety that we are creating. If one day some of you do a PhD on Kota, see the stress, anxiety, tension, suicide, psychic neurosis that so many students pass through there, are experiencing there. So Patna wanted to be a new Kota. And that's the election agenda for a party. And that appealed to many parents. And that is where, on the one hand, you have this kind of a coaching center, this kind of a pathology of MCQ pattern of standardized tests. Now, so we are under this crisis. And it's not easy to fight it. So many battles have to be fought. But with that, even now, when you come to, so one of the finest university in the country, Delhi University, and one of those universities left where particularly good social sciences and humanities are taught, and you come to, and such brilliant, bright teachers. One of the things which I feel both the student and the teacher ought to do, no matter how difficult the struggle is to transform our classroom, try our best to transform our classroom into a reasonably, creatively nuanced, critical dialogic space where learning becomes certain kind of awareness, celebration, and which no coaching center guru can give you. I'll just give you an illustration. Suppose you are studying, say Max Weber as a sociologist, as a thinker, and when Max Weber talked about, say, the disenchantment. Then all those three thinkers, Durkheim, Weber, and Marx, what they were observing. They were observing the late 19th and early 20th century modern Western industrial capitalism, how it functions, what are the dynamics of the society, how it functions. Durkheim was seeing it in terms of a very specialized, heightened division of labor. And whether with this kind of differentiation, certain kind of solidarity is possible. And that led him to write on organic solidarity. Marx was talking about how capitalism actually functions. What is the dialectic? What are the class struggles and the class conflicts? And Weber was saying that how this, all these rational legal institutions have emerged, from bank to the industry to the university, and what kind of new authority is emerging, the bureaucracy, the rational legal authority. Now, all of them were enriching your understanding of the modern industrial capitalism. 3 vantage points. Now as a student, what your task and the task of a teacher is to just open your eyes and to see that, just work with these 3 thinkers, Durkheim, Weber, and Marx, and evolve certain kind of sensitivity to look at the world. Now, you are living in a different world, which neither Marx nor Durkheim nor Weber saw and experienced. But what Durkheim, Weber, and Marx, with a very creative engagement with that, with the help of a teacher, good teacher would help you. It gives you certain eyes, enables you to sharpen certain questions. Say for example, as I said, Marx did talk about commodity fetishism. Marx did talk about alienation. Now you ask that had Marx been alive today, how he could have, talked about another kind of alienation or the new form of alienation that we see in today in the corporate capitalism in our work sphere. So then when we study that, when we do engage with the discipline like that, then what happens that our knowledge does not remain fossilized. That Durkheim in the first semester is over, Durkheim is forgotten. It's not like that. It gives you a sensitivity. It enables you. It's like saying that you read a beautiful Premchand story. You never finish that story. That story is with you. That story is with you. That has enriched you. That has enriched you. So it's like that. So when you and that no coaching center guru can do it. Coaching center guru can only give you how to crack the MCQ pattern of exams, and how to solve 60 mathematical riddles in 30 minutes. Yeah, but coaching center guru cannot make you fall in love with maths. Coaching center guru would transform you into a strategist, into an exam warrior, but a great meaningful learning and a great teacher would excite you, would invite you to the domain of ideas, to the realm of ideas. And we need teachers of that kind in our classrooms.
Definitely, sir. As far as I was able to grasp, students should be taught to apply their knowledge and to problems and experiences. That is the emancipatory education, to be more precise. And a true teacher is someone who holds the light or lamp of truth for their students and has the capability to touch their souls. Once Shashwat sir made us watch Dead Poets Society, and there is a quote which for me truly reflects an true teacher, that a true teacher is someone that who can make me realize that no matter what people say, words and ideas can change the world. So moving forward, as I mentioned earlier, that my parents were furious when I decided to take up arts and leave science. And ironically, what saved me was the brand name of Delhi University. Educational institutes have become brands. While there is no doubt that, well, there is a big doubt that these prestigious institutions do provide quality education, the problems comes when the students don't care what discipline they are choosing, but they make sure to get enrolled in a prestigious institute. So, sir, please share your views if it's right to choose a branded institute over your interest in a subject.
I think there are two ways I would respond to this question. One is that branding and becoming a marketized consumable product. It is the dominant ethos of the age, driven by the neoliberal market logic. Everything is a product, everything is a brand. And so a film star is a brand, Kaun Banega Crorepati cannot function without the brand called Amitabh Bachchan, So everything is a brand, and that notion of the brand has entered so deeply into collective consciousness that it has entered into the domain of intellectual ideas. If you look deeply about many of our literature festivals, the Jaipur Literary Festival and the other festivals, and if you look deeply, then you could see that how the economy of branded publication houses, and the huge play of money, and they would also construct and create certain branded authors, so those branded authors would be invited, and the branded publication houses would spend a huge amount of money, and it would be seen as certain kind of product and the brand. So India Today conclave, for example, you took, and say our notion with the top 10 people, top 100 people, powerful people. So when JNO crisis was going on 5-6 years back, now India today made a list where, for example, the same list carries the name of Shahil Rashid, Kanhaiya Kumar, and Priyanka Chopra. Now, when you see the same list, now, how come Priyanka Chopra and Kanhaiya Kumar can be in the same list? Priyanka Chopra's domain is different. It's the cinema, it's the entertainment, it's the culture industry. And Kanhaiya Kumar's domain is the domain of politics. But what India today was interested in, selling the brand, reducing even a political activist into a brand. And for that, there is no qualitative difference between Priyanka Chopra as a brand and Kanhaiya Kumar as a brand, and both would enhance the market value of India today. In front of the colored television, the gorgeous, celebration, So unfortunately, it has happened in the domain of thing. And that's why today, colleges, universities, and our obsession with ranking, and with all that, we are producing it as a brand. And branded subject, branded discipline, branded college, and the university, that notion has emerged. And when there is a brand consciousness, you lose your autonomy. If the brand consciousness invades your consciousness, then what happens that, you are not, you are not actually buying a t-shirt. You are buying a brand. You are not actually buying a kurta. You are buying a brand. So in the age of brand consciousness becomes so seductive, so powerful that it diminishes your own choice, your own critical thinking. And that's why, for example, the neoliberal capitalist market enters into our life through the logic of seduction. It makes you so hypnotized as by the brand consciousness. And it is happening to the college university today. And it is affecting many vulnerable young students. Say, I have been grown up with a brand that LSR is a brand. Stephens is a brand. I love history or I love physics, but I am not getting physics in Stephens. But I am getting psychology in physics, in Stephens. I love the brand so much that I deny my liking for the physics because I have to be a student of a branded college. I take psychology in Stephens. I love history, but I'm not getting history in LSR. And I am taking BLEd in LSR because brand LSR must define me. So what happens that we are at a loss. Many young students are at a loss in the search for the brand consciousness. And that is where I believe that it's a very, very critical issue that students, teachers, parents, and particularly the teachers have to play a very, very important role in giving certain kind of clarity, to young minds and students, and that what you are searching for. And our choices today have become often we can't make choices because brand consciousness, is so hypnotizing, so seductive that it makes it difficult for us to make our choices. We think that we are making choices, but actually we are not making choices. It is the brand that is speaking through us, and that is where I think the lot of, to come to that earlier question, role right from school to college to university, role of teachers, lot of conversations, dialogue. Hardly we these days talk in families, where parents, children, they sit together, talk about many issues in a very free-floating conversation. Hardly we talk these days because we are so preoccupied, possibly even in the dining table, all are preoccupied with their mobile, so hardly we talk, we share ideas, articulate our doubt, anxiety, and somehow we listen to one another. So art of listening, conversation, debate, that would lead to a lot of clarity.
Said, well, the answer could not be any more convincing. Everyone, I guess, have noted down that how important it is to follow your interest, because as you also stated earlier that it is only when we are guided by the love and interest for something, we don't really need a work-life balance. And our contribution will be far more in a subject if we choose a subject of our interest.
Right.
Moving on, while researching, we came across your studies on modernity as well as education and teaching methodology. So, sir, I would like to ask that what perspective a student should have while learning topics like caste system and religion in modern India? Because the subject of religion and caste system, they have very ancient roots. So, how we shall approach these topics in modern times?
Yeah, if you look at, if we come to the Indian thing, if we look at, say, for example, from the period of colonialism and the struggle for decolonization to that entire journey of the post-colonial modern Indian state and society, if you see that journey, say for last 200 years and other. Now you see that, and when sociologically, with a sense of sociology and history and politics, you look at that journey, then you try to see that intense intellectual, social, and political churning took place, primarily centered on these two questions, caste and religion. A great churning took place, great debate, contestation, differences that took place. Say, for instance, that on the one hand, you see that, for example, during the colonial period, when the Hunter Commission came and would write a report on education, say Jyotirao Phule made the commission. And Jyotirao Phule said that there is not much hope from the forward caste teachers in our pathshalas, in our schools, in our education system, because caste hierarchy is so deeply ingrained in Indian consciousness. And so they would not be really interested in disseminating light of knowledge among the subaltern castes. So Jyotirao Phule gave a memorandum and he articulated his hope that possibly the colonial state with certain kind of modernist notion of education would be free from the biases that the Brahminical caste or the forward caste was suffering from. So he made an appeal to the Hunter Commission. But also Jyotirao Phule soon realized that colonial state was also not actually interested in the emancipation of the marginalized caste. Colonial state came here primarily to loot and to exploit. It was not revolutionary in the sense that would liberate human society, And then, for example, as time passed, you could see that the caste question, that in the journey of India's decolonization and modernity, debate began to take place. There were two branches of that debate, which I believe is very important to understand. One from Dr. B.R. Ambedkar and another from Gandhiji. Now, what Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, with the traditions of Jyotirao Phule and others, what B.R. Ambedkar brought, and as you say, that he came with a hammer. That when you read The Philosophy of Hinduism, this book, or you read Annihilation of Caste, then you see that here a man with profound criticality and the scholarship questioning For example, our Dharma Shastras, how the caste hierarchy is sanctified through that, and with very sharp modernist logic of liberty, equality, and fraternity, he was questioning the hierarchical caste system. And he would argue that India's road to emancipation is impossible without questioning and interrogating that caste question. And as a result, agenda of freedom struggle and the decolonization ought to be integrated with this struggle also. So Ambedkar, the way he would mobilize and the way he would become a great inspiration for, the Dalit movement, the lower caste movement, and the anti-caste movement, and it would become a major part of the intellectual discourse. And likewise, Gandhiji passed through a more carved, complex trajectory from the 1920s to 1940s. Now, 1920s, he had an ambiguous notion with the Varnashram system. But by the 1940s, he was becoming rather more sharply critical of the caste question. And he was saying that I would attend only those weddings which are, outcast marriages, And then Gandhi was also taking another agenda, and he was constantly creating a notion that unless the so-called privileged castes, rectify themselves, change themselves, undergo a process of transformation, they would lose their legitimacy. They would lose their legitimacy. So both Gandhi and Ambedkar, they were addressing that issue of the caste question. Now, politically, there are two ways of responding to it. One way of responding to it is that you see it in terms of a dichotomy, Ambedkar versus Gandhi. And as if, you can't learn from both of them. And another is that there are also activist thinkers who would argue that the very rigid dichotomy of Gandhi versus Ambedkar doesn't make much sense on the caste question. It is important to learn what has to be learned from both of them and create a new praxis, discourse, and politics of emancipation, as far as the caste question is concerned. And this battle goes on in the post-colonial Indian state today. And likewise, you could see on the religion question, on the one hand, you could see that what we call, as student of sociology and history, you read what we call that 19th century, early 20th century reform, be it Dayanand Saraswati, be it Swami Vivekananda, Ram Mohan Roy, and whatever, we could see, for example, also a churning on the religious question is coming. So a lot of churning on the religious question is coming. And Vivekananda was talking about practical Vedanta, how Vedanta has to be rescued from caves and forests, and it should be applied to eradicate social evils, questions against idol worship, and many of these things were coming in a big way. So there was certain kind of a question. And then people like Nehru and Gandhi brought the question about that how the modern India would be. It would not become, despite passing through the trauma of partition and the two-nation theory propagated by Savarkar and Jinnah, both, now what would be the trajectory of the new India? And here the trajectory was that it would be based on cultural pluralism, religious pluralism. It would not be a Hindu state. There is a temptation to reduce it into a Hindu state because Pakistan was a theological state. But the grand dream of that project was that it would become a more pluralist kind of a society. Now, those were the very integral part of our grand dream for how to fight the caste and how to, despite the trauma of partition, to live with the religious pluralism. And the state is relatively neutral from the people religion. Now, today, your challenge is that, and the question that you would raise, and I would not respond to that question, the question you would raise, is it that the India you live in today, we have lost that grand dream, the dream that Ambedkar, Phule, Gandhi, Nehru, Tagore, who is the portrait, whether we are losing that grand dream. Is it like, going back to, the kind of divisive mentality, which India passed through in the 30s and early 40s. And Manto's short stories would tell you that what it meant, what kind of a devastation, bloodshed, trauma, and violence we passed through that. Do you want to repeat that violence, or do you want to engage more meaningfully with the dream of that road to Indian modernity through Ambedkar, through Gandhi, through Tagore, through Vivekananda? These are the very important questions your generation has to ask.
An apt answer for this modern society. To observe the evils like caste system and religious violence, we better need to be equipped with the times and go on the road of modernity. So while we are on the topic of modernity, I would like to ask you that what is modernity? What are the traits of a modern person?
You know that first you see the genealogy of the term, that, for example, when you and I study modern social sciences, you and I often use a distinctive socio-historical meaning to that term. And quite often we say that what social scientists regard as the project of modernity that was deeply related to a great turning point and the transformation that post-Reformation, post-Renaissance, industrial, modern West was passing through, where the church and the religious authority was losing its domination. The new industrial bourgeoisie has emerged, and new Enlightenment philosophies from Rousseau to Kant and others have emerged. Empiricism, science, objectivity had emerged. So a way of living and seeing the world, which is based on, for example, separation of science from religion, state from religion, a way of seeing that emphasizes empiricism and rationality and belief in the scientific thinking and believe in the human capacity, technological capacity for development and progress and birth of the modern nation state. So these were we often characterize with that grand project of modernity. Liberalism, the modern nation state, empiricism, rational scientific thinking, secularism, industrialism, the notion of progress, So that's the way, for example, we often say the modernity. So it is said that a modern mind is one, who could look at the world rationally, scientifically, who is objective, who has been inspired by Francis Bacon and René Descartes and Isaac Newton and Charles Darwin, who believe in the notion of progress, that human beings can change their destiny and human beings have the knowledge. Knowledge is power. Technology is science through which they could make their destiny change it, going beyond fatalism and the passivity. So that was, for example, we generally see it, it's a historical connotation, sociological connotation. But when you go deep, more and more into it, then you see that although, there was a time when this project was so much celebrated, about that project of modernity, its notion of progress, its notion of techno-scientific development, its notion of liberal democracy was so much thing. But slowly the critique of that project also began. And one of the major critique came from the decolonization movement, because all the countries, which were colonized, now in that country, they were asking the question, how is it that democracy in England, but suppression in the colonized countries? Right to speech is in British Parliament, but completely Janjalabad in India. So the inherent contradictions and the hypocrisy of that Western democracy. In the 20th century, you could see that how American democracy would cause war, right from Afghanistan to Vietnam to the different part of the world. So the decolonization movement from Asia, Africa, Latin America, that now create a new notion. And you would essentially read what we call the post-colonialism, the post-colonial literature. That became extremely critical of the colonized modernity, Western modernity, European modernity, that brought about new questions, questions which people like Fanon, Gandhi, Mao, and other raised. So that is one. And second is another thing which you would read, what in social science we call it the postmodernism, which also, for example, a lot of thinkers began to emerge in the West, who could see that, that we can no longer sustain that grand ambition of the Enlightenment modernity, centralized grand ambition of this enlightened modernity, and West can no longer speak on behalf of the rest of the world. So postmodernists began to talk about multivocality, plurality of voices, rather than a centralized singular voices. And then postmodernists also talk about a great transformation has taken place in the realm of culture and symbols. So they would often talk about, say, hyper-reality, and I'll just end with an illustration. Now, when they talk about hyper-reality, just take a simple illustration. In the age of media saturation, when you and I are constantly exposed to constant dissemination of images, Twitter, Facebook, television images, and the images are all pervading, then, for example, you and I are often confused, that is Mr. Modi real or is he hyper real? Is he more real than the real? Now, which is Modi? On the meditative posture at Kedarnath, cleaning dirt in a sea beach, and visiting the workers at the Central Vista project, and everything very instantly, so quickly and instantly disseminated through symbols and images, So, which is actually real? Or is there anything real at all? Is the Gulf War actually Gulf War? Or is it like an equally exciting video game that our children play? That's why Baudrillard once asked with a lot of agony, did the Gulf War actually happen? Or the way the media projected that after our dinner with butter chicken, together with the 100-meter Olympic race, with the excitement, and then we watch America's carpet bombing. Is cricket a cricket or is it a surgical strike? Is Virat Kohli is a player or is an army general? Is real? And is it at all possible to know the real in a world of this kind? No,
Sir, while we got insight into this modern world, sir, do you think that modernity is a threat to tradition and culture?
I think that, again, with the notion of modernity that you were talking about, one is that when we see, for example, a very striking illustrations, and I believe that I do not know whether these days people read that book, university in colleges, that Rudolf and Rudolf, husband, wife, they wrote extensively on India's modernity. And there's a beautiful essay, and it came out as a separate book also, and that was on Gandhi, the traditional roots of charisma. And also the philosopher, political philosopher Bhikkhu Parekh has written a beautiful book, Colonialism, Tradition and Reform, and that was on Gandhi. I'm specifically talking about it because in Gandhi's life and politics, you see a very creatively nuanced critical interplay of modernity and traditional symbols. Say for example, now in Ahimsa, a deep root in the spiritual tradition, be it Buddhism, be it Jainism. There's a deep root in our spiritual tradition. It is not something that came in the 19th century or 18th century. It was something deeply rooted in the civilizational traditions, in the spiritual tradition. Now, how Gandhi worked with it in the 20th century, in the process of a struggle for decolonization. Gandhi took that notion, and now Gandhi transformed Ahimsa from a merely a question of one's own spiritual moksha and salvation to a political weapon for a collective resistance, for a collective struggle, a political weapon with a lot of moral appeal, and it got transformed now into a weapon for resisting colonialism, for creating a mass movement. So a modern mass movement and the decolonization struggle, Gandhi, with its creative genius, was working on a traditional spiritual notion of the Ahimsa, or say fasting. You and I in India are used to fasting. Our mothers do fasting. Our grandmothers do fasting. All sorts of fasting is so there in our traditions. Now, again, how he transformed it. Now it became a question, again, once again, a part of Shotagraha, a movement of resistance. Gandhi's hunger strike, Gandhi's fasting. So what I was saying, that, for example, there you could see in many things that civilizations which are very old, it's not like it never happens that one system comes and your everything is removed. So always a constant interplay goes on, critical, creative interplay goes on. So I think that is something that is happening with the interactions of cultures and civilization. And even you could see, for example, in terms of globalized symbols, on the one hand, you see the increasing McDonaldization of the world. But for example, you could see that how the McDonald's in different countries also come forward with different kind of food item, which is conducive to the local dietary practice and the taste. So I think that as a student of sociology, you have to see that these are the constant living interplay. A lot of creative, critical interplay of different symbols do take place. And that possibly takes you to a notion of hybridity. So when you ask that, who are you? Then you could see different aspect of your being. You could see your 5,000-year-old civilization in you. You could see your very modernist self. You could see your globalized self. You could see a constant interplay of that. And a discipline like social science and humanities open your eyes, enable you to understand, see that, it's not a very simple unilinear definition of you. It has so many undercurrents inside you and me.
Yes. So your answer really tramples upon the popular notion that we have to choose either traditionality or modernity. But in reality, we can be both traditional and modern. It is just an interplay of both. Sir, this brings me to my last question, and we all are very excited to hear the answer to this one. I read it somewhere that you wish to see a poet, that is Rabindranath Tagore, talking to a scientist, Albert Einstein. Sir, if it happens, then what, according to you, would be their conversation about?
It did happen. Tagore and Einstein met. And there was a beautiful conversation on creation, on cosmos, on science, poetry, all sorts of things they conversed. And even on YouTube, you could see Jiddu Krishnamurti talking to a great physicist called David Bohm. So they were talking about, about life, about certainty, about uncertainty, So a physicist with quantum mechanics were talking with Krishnamurti as a Jiddu Krishnamurti as a wanderer. I think these dialogues are extremely beautiful, extremely important. And these dialogues help us. And when we listen to those dialogues, receive those dialogues, then these dialogues do help us to enrich our understanding of the world and break different kind of insulated boundaries. From the island, from the pond you enter into the sea, and that is like the fusion of horizons. And they were great people, Tagore, Einstein, Jiddu Krishnamurti, and David Bohm. But talk about the lesser mortals like you and me. For example, when you and I are in a very open, receptive mind, in a coffee house, in a cafeteria, in a library, in a tea dhaba, talk to one another, converse with one another. You may be a student of sociology, someone might be a student of physics, someone might be a medical scientist and the doctor. But when with an open, receptive mind, we talk about issues, then we realize that how much you and I how much everyone can contribute to the other's understanding, and so that's why I believe that it is very, very important. And I would always imagine, I would celebrate that idea that, say, for example, a physicist and a poet often meet and talk, often converse. And when I say that, I'm saying it, I actually saw a teacher like this when I was at school. It was a small town, and those days were not the days of private fancy school. It's a very good quality government schools. Your generation would not believe that. So we had a teacher who used to teach us physics, great teacher. So he one day, when we were in class 10 or 11, he told us that I am teaching you optics, I'm teaching you Newtonian theory of optics and all that. But if you really want to understand color deeply, intensely, meaningfully, together with physics, you should make it a point that you rise, sunrise, and sunset more frequently, and see the amazing color of the sky at the time of the sunrise and the sunset. We didn't understand anything. We said, why this sir is saying all these things? Much later, we could understand that what he was meaning. And I would just end with an illustration that when you visit a mountain and the mountain peak, now, for example, if you come to Uttarakhand and come to a place, you cross the Bhimtal, Nainital, and those places and come to a slightly remote places, say Mukteshwar, Ramgarh, Kausani, places like that. And quite early morning, you stand up. On the one hand, the grandness, the vastness of the mountains. And quite early in the morning, you see that the snow-clad peak, Panchachulli and Nandadevi and Trishul, and the sun ray is coming, striking that snow-clad peaks. And when you look at it, it was grand, beautiful, divine. And then you feel that's the point where Isaac Newton and William Blake would hug each other. Everything is possible because there is a perfect physics and mathematics operating there. You only from that point you could see that. Sun is rising in the east and the peak is here and the first ray is striking there. There is a very profound mathematical calculation and the physics into that. But it is not just that. When the ray is coming, you are seeing that the divine is talking to you. It is so beautiful. And you feel like reciting Walt Whitman. to me, every inch of space is a miracle. At the time, it's a miracle, And I think that when these two combine, when Walt Whitman and Isaac Newton, hug each other, and also when we may not philosophize it, but when we experience it, we actually see that physics has become aesthetics, aesthetics has become physics. Science has become poetry, poetry has become science, And I think life is like this. Universities erect such very rigid walls of separation that this is School of Physical Sciences, this is School of Art and Aesthetics, But life actually is not like that, where everything is coming. And that's why when you and I fall sick, and if you and I are contemplative, then you ask that who am I? My CT scan, my ultrasound, or am I something else also? Am I something else also? Am I also a being capable of reflecting on my ultrasound? Am I also a consciousness whose ultrasound cannot be made? Because it is a consciousness that is reflecting on the ultrasound of the stomach. And then you feel that, that a medical scientist ought to talk to a Tibetan Lama and Buddhist Lama, and who is writing and reflecting on the Tibetan book on the living and dying. So that's why I believe that poets and the philosophers and the scientists and the doctors all have to meet, talk to one another, converse one another, enrich our understanding of the world. And you and I too have to be open. We have to see beyond reductionism, and that's why I'm saying from pond, we should move, and converse.
Sir, while listening to your words, we were imagining whatever you just said. And I can look at everyone's faces and they all are smiling. So I can truly relate that how interesting the conversation must have been. Uh, sir, with this answer, we will conclude our first segment, and I will pass over the mic to Deshna.
Good noon, sir. Myself, Deshna Jain. I will be your host for the next segment. And I would like to say thank you, sir. It's been a privilege for me to hear you on such deep and stagnant issues. It was really insightful, sir. So, without any further ado, moving to our second segment, which will be more light and interesting, consisting of short answer questions. So, my first question is, who is Avijit Pathak as a person? Apart from your occupation, apart from being a professor, who is Avijit Pathak as a person?
He and biodata is a myth, is your past, your memory. I am the living moment, the living present, talking to you, the living consciousness.
Yes, sir. After hearing your answer, all I can say is I thought I know about you, but I guess this is the kind of knowledge we cannot really get through books, and which is making me more curious for the next question I will ask. What makes JNU different from other universities?
The dream or the possibility with which it began. A country like ours needs good quality public education with its ethos of multiculturalism, heterogeneity, and pluralism.
I agree with you. As an outsider, I had always been able to see the other side of the coin, the unwanted rebellions protesting every now and then. But now I have realized that JNU is actually 30 years ahead of the rest of the society in each and every field, be it research, be it academics, be it awareness. And JNU has always been able to set a goal and really achieve it. So my next question is, what are your views on academic freedom in today's India?
Our democracy cannot survive unless our families, our classrooms, our civil society, become dialogic, critically reflexive, argumentative, and thoughtful. And hence, the culture of academic freedom, debate, discussion, dialogue is an integral part, or to be seen as an integral part of a society that takes participatory democracy, that takes intellectual contestation and argumentation seriously. If it dies, there is a danger of authoritarianism.
Yes, sir, I could not agree with you more. Sir, the next question is egalitarianism a myth for 21st and upcoming centuries?
It would be tragic if we transform it into a myth, but it would be really meaningful if we see it as a possibility we ought to continually strive for.
Yes, sir. Sir, the next question is, what are your views on India's obsession with English means education?
A sad state of affairs that possibly remind us that how difficult it is to decolonize the consciousness. And second, in a world characterized by neoliberal global capitalism, when English, in a way, became the dominant language of the market, the corporate and the economic transaction, that is allowed to marginalize, to devalue, I think that what sustains a civilization like ours, a very rich linguistic tradition and plurality of language traditions.
There was a time when English was just an alien language to us before the colonial rule came. But now even a student who is studying Hindi major has to prove his intellect through the EBSA standards of fluency in English. So the next question is, if we neglect discrimination, biased behaviors, and injustice, is diversity based on class, culture, and race a hindrance or help for a society?
I think that the natural landscape makes you sensitive and familiar with diversities. There are multiple plants, multiple trees, multiple rivers, multiple mountains, and the waterfalls. And we are not separated from that. So I think that the plurality and the diversity is our strength. But plurality and diversity can become truly our strength only when you and I succeed in fighting the hegemonic domination of one particular class, one particular caste, one particular ethnicity, or one particular race over others. Pluralism can sustain itself meaningfully only with the ethos of egalitarianism.
I have seen this when I was in school, when there was very innocence and generosity in my classroom. There was a whole lot of diversity on the grounds of religion, caste, and everything. And it truly never became a hindrance for anyone. It was our strength, actually. The last question of this segment is, how do you imagine future of India? What challenges you think would be there after a decade from now?
I think that the future of India would depend to a great extent on your generation and the new generation that is coming. And it requires, I believe, broadly two things. A great conviction that a society cannot remain sane or healthy with such mind-boggling inequality, oppression. So the fate of new India would depend to the extent we fight economic inequality, religious bigotry, patriarchal caste violence, and move towards a truly democratic egalitarian space. And it also depends on another thing, on the churning of what I would call libertarian pedagogy, critical pedagogy, and more emancipatory education from school to colleges to the university, the education that opens one's eyes, the education that inspires one, the education that makes one realize that our sanity lies in justice, in equality, and a kind of society that is ecologically sensitive, egalitarian, and pluralist.
That's quite a vision, sir. I hope whatever the circumstances and state of affairs are, humanity would still conquer everything. So after the end of this segment, we have prepared a surprise for you, and I really hope you like it. It's a one-word segment. I will say a word, and you have to say the first thing that comes to your mind. It could be a word or more or less a sentence. So shall we start, sir?
Let's start.
Comes to your mind when you think of JNU?
A noble dream India ought to strive for and keep it alive.
Second is Delhi University.
A university with immense possibilities that allows one to transcend limiting identities of ethnicity, of particular region, and all that.
Yes, sir, true. And then student activism.
Activism with non-reductionism, heightened sensitivity, and very powerful non-violent mode of resistance is the need of the hour.
Yes, sir, a ray of hope. And the next is secularism.
If by secularism one means the egalitarian, reciprocal, peaceful coexistence of different faith and religions in a pluralist society like ours, it's a wonderful ideal. But if by secularism one means that it is the domination or the hegemony of, say, for example, atheism or mere what one would call a mere agnostic or the scientific temper, and if by secularism one means that one devalues people who see the world differently, who have faith, who have look at the world differently, then that secularism might be very oppressive. So what is needed is essentially plurality of faiths without the domination, without the hegemony of any particular faith and domination. So it's like imagining a world in which an atheist like M.N. Roy, as a Marxist radical humanist, and someone from Kabir Panth reciting Kabir's Doha, and a Ramakrishna Mission monk talking about practical Vedanta, and a Sufi in Hazrat Nijamuddin, all can share a cup of coffee together and learn from one another. So that is my notion of secularism.
Well said, sir. The next one is freedom of speech.
Freedom of speech is absolutely important with the added responsibility. And that responsibility, Gautam Buddha reminded us again and again of his eightfold path, right speech, speech which is not toxic, which is deep, meaningful, and the speech, which despite its immense criticality, radiates the spirit of love and hope.
Absolutely, sir. The next one is democracy.
Democracy is a way of living and thinking that enables you and me to become receptive, to become dialogic, and to cultivate what a lot of Buddhists regard as the art of compassionate listening, mindful listening. We must learn to listen to one another with deep care. If there is no listening, there is no democracy.
Right, sir. The next one is science and society.
Science as a body of knowledge or as a way of seeing that arouses consciousness, criticality, and makes you test your ideas through the lived reality and experiences. That science has immense possibility, and that science is desirable. But when science is reduced into scienticism, or science is reduced into technocratic domination, then that science becomes oppressive. That science becomes part of corporate, military, techno-industrial complex. But the science that liberates the consciousness, the science that makes us an inquirer, a wanderer, that science is liberating.
Next one is hero worship.
I believe in creative, dialogic, mindful engagement with personalities. It could be a philosopher, it could be a revolutionary, it could be a poet. And that is, I think, a deep, mindful, relational engagement with personalities, with many things. But blind worshipping or reducing oneself into a passive imitator of someone, that I think is not a very healthy idea. So, but a deep engagement with criticality as well as love and respect, that has its significance. And I think that's the way many of us grew up. For example, when we hear the names of the likes of Shri Bhagat Singh, likes of Ambedkar, Mahatma Gandhi, Rabindranath Tagore, Munshi Premchand, and others. And I think that we all strive for a very living, loving engagement with their ideas, the ideas that also activate us, activate our thinking, instead of reducing them into fossilite objects of worship.
Right, sir. So the next one is power.
The only power that matters and which the world lacks today is the power of love. Love is the ultimate power, and that does miracles.
So the next is politics and religion.
Politics, a liberating, emancipatory politics could be a spiritual quest for the oneness of humankind, and it was in that sense, I have no hesitation in saying Marx was deeply spiritual. Gandhi was deeply spiritual. Ambedkar was deeply spiritual. But when religion is not that spiritual quest for oneness of humankind, but religion is only a limiting identity filled with priestcraft and violence, then if that religion colonizes the domain of politics, that politics becomes very oppressive, reactionary, and divisive.
Well said, sir. The next one is capitalism.
One of the worst things that happened to human civilization and the history, because it essentially cultivates some of the gross emotions and the qualities of human being. Social Darwinism, or survival of the fittest. You become an atomized warrior and competitor. It denies the spirit of togetherness and cooperation, and it's based on the notion of unlimited greed and desire. And it is primarily responsible for all that you are seeing today: militarism, militant nationalism, and what you and I are watching today, climate crisis.
So the next one is Gen Z.
I think only yesterday I was talking to somebody. I think that it was like this: technology is emancipatory when, with critical pedagogy and reflexivity, we know how to live with that, how to use that. But the same technology can be extremely oppressive and seductive and oppressive if we miss that critical pedagogy. So it's like saying that there is an internet in front of me and there is a huge domain of material, from reading material to the visual, to the film, to the YouTube. Now, what I choose? So you give a smartphone. The politicians are fond of giving smartphone to school students. But what politicians do not know, how the politicians would give them a good teacher, a critical pedagogue. So they give the smartphone and they give the internet. But what do I watch as a 16-year-old young boy and the girl? Do I watch about, do I watch pornography? Do I watch something very glossy? Or do I acquire that consciousness to search a good story of a Malayalam writer translated into Hindi or the English and reading that? That smartphone or the internet as such would not tell you. For that, you need a sensitive parent, you need a good teacher, you need a good friend, And if we miss that, then we would not know how to live with the technology. But if we have that, then we can do wonders with that, We can do wonders with that. It could become then very revolutionary. It could become very radical. It could liberate our consciousness, democratize our knowledge traditions. Now, and for that, that's why our first part of the interview, education, critical pedagogy, awareness, that is important. Technology as such cannot revolutionize our consciousness. Technology is a tool, and you and I know how to use it meaningfully, And that is where I think that I would just say, tell this generation.
I agree with you. And the last one is online classes.
Definitely, that online classes have severe limitations. And one of the major limitation is that, face-to-face interactions, touch, smell, looking each other, sharing the emotions and the experiences, that is a very integral part of learning process, because learning is a very collaborative kind of a process. It is not just the dissemination of information. It is like walking together, learning together. So I think that is something that we are all missing in the last 2 years. So that is a severe limitation of online classes. But one thing still, given the situation, as teachers and young learner and students, we could do, we, despite that limitation, could try our best to make it somewhat more participatory, more dialogic, and more alive, and that is possible, and that needs a collective responsibility. Sometimes a teacher giving a lecture online and just seeing the blank screen, everybody's camera is switched off. Now I am seeing some of you here, some of you have put on your camera, and even in the process of conversation, I could see your changing expression. Sometimes you are contemplative, sometimes you are smiling, sometimes you are thinking. And I think that matters. That human emotions matter, And these are the responsibilities. I think you and I all are learning this forum, learning to cope with that. So despite its limitations, if we respect each other, take each other somewhat seriously, then at least somehow we could humanize this forum. Otherwise, at times it is very alienating, it's very alienating. Yes.
A lot of us haven't been able to even visit our college, but we really appreciate all the efforts teachers make It is very new for all of us, but we have got really good teachers and we are really glad. Sir, so now that we are done with our third segment, which I really hope you enjoyed, I would
Yeah.
like to pass over the mic to Janvi Shukla for the next part. Over to you, Didi.
Very good afternoon, sir.
Yes,
I'm
Janvi. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Janvi. Yeah.
First of all, thank you very much for giving your precious time to us. It may be just an ordinary interview for you, but it was very insightful for us. And this session has really changed our perspectives in so many ways. I personally have jotted down so many points, and I'm sure my friend would relate to me. And I totally agreed when you said a lotus is a lotus and it cannot be a rose. That line has significant in so many ways. And also when you said that we should keep asking questions, because I think that's what makes a student. So will I would like if you can answer some of the questions which are raised in the chat box by our team members. And the first question is by Chavi, and she has asked that what were the big issues you faced during your research, and any tips and suggestions if you can give us.
I would suggest one thing that I just share it with my students and others who take do research, MPhil or PhD. You see that when you join the MPhil PhD program, a very important period of your youthful life stage. Say, for example, you start your MPhil PhD from the age of 20, 21, and another 3 to 4 years, you do 4 years. It's a very important stage of life cycle, And I think that it is very important when one chooses that, when one ultimately decides one will do that, there are 2 or 3 things which are important. That the topic, the theme that you choose, that should really involve you. Involve your intellect, involve your politics, involve your sensitivity, involve you wholeheartedly. Because 3 to 4 years of the youthful life you'd spend on that. So it should completely involve you. Don't choose a theme keeping the interest of the supervisor in mind. Supervisor would not do the research on your behalf. You would do the research. Again, because of the brand, it happens. So you feel, though, I have to work with Professor Andre Bete. So Professor Andre Bete's interest is in that domain. So let me choose the topic accordingly. Andre Bete did his research in his own time. Now, Andre Bete, with his experience, would help you. But this time it is you who have to do it. So the topic should be your thing that arouses your interest, that involves you. That is the number 1 thing. And number 2 thing is that, that as I say again and again, that celebrate that moment. And by celebration, I mean that you read so many things, you go to your field work, you meet so many people, and maybe all that you have acquired in these 3 to 4 years, only the 30% of it you would be able to use in your PhD thesis. But those 70% would remain with you. That would enrich you, that would open your eyes, that would change you, that would give you a new kind of perspective and the thinking, help you in your later life. So I think that celebration of that research and the topic arouses your very interest. That is important. And third is that the living that moment. And when you do it, I know that all of us would definitely worry about our job, about our thing after the PhD and all that. These are natural. But don't allow that future anxiety to paralyze you completely. Then you would not be able to enjoy your work. So I think that mindfulness is very important. And if those 3 years you live intensely and you grow, evolve as a thinker, as a good human being, as a researcher, maybe after 3 years, time would take care of you, Right now, when you start doing your PhD, don't get so much paralyzed by fear that what would happen after the PhD, do I get a job, and things of that kind. How we handle with that. And it is here, I think, that a supervisor, and if you are lucky to find a supervisor who is not just an expert, but a supervisor as a co-traveler who understands you, you feel free with the supervisor. You can talk, you can share your ideas, you can articulate your anxiety. Then I think that's another addition to it, another beauty of it. So this is what I would say.
Thank you, sir, for your valuable suggestions. And the next question is by Mehak, and she has asked that we have different point of views, and sometimes there is a conflict in ideas we have. So, how did you overcome the aggression and controversy?
You know that definitely in any kind of politico-cultural intellectual milieu, from the family to the university to the friendship circle to the classrooms, we see there is a multiple worldviews and at times a very strong polarized conflicting worldviews that we operate. Even in families, we could say. The other day, a student of mine told me that, sir, my father trusts Arnab Goswami more than me. I tell that, no, JNU is not like this. You know, it's not that you entered the JNU campus and terrorists with the gun are roaming around everywhere. Instead, it is a place, the library, my teacher and the student having a cup of tea, talking, conversing, learning taking place. But the father says that the JNU professors and the JNU students have brainwashed your mind. Arnab is right. You know, G television is right. Republic is right. So it has entered everywhere, in the families, in the friendship circle, in thing. But I think that it's a very difficult thing. But the thing is that constant, as I said, listening, a rightful speech, and the conversations and the conversation. It is quite possible that you and I would not agree with many things, but I believe that what is important is that mutual acknowledgement and of each other. Quite often today in our conversation, we have lost that spirit. I do not agree with you, and then immediately I demonize you. You know, and that, I think, has done a lot of damage to the character of our conversation and the debates. And that's why I think that some kind of receptivity, some kind of openness, some kind of humility, firmness and humility, and at the same time, not necessarily demonizing the other you are differing with. And I often see it among all of us, among intellectuals, teachers, students. Where we see at times this kind of a tendency. I do not agree with you on certain things, and I immediately begin to accuse you. Oh, you are the dalal of the bourgeoisie. You are this, you are that, you are parochial, you are this, or something like that. Or you do not agree with me, you say, oh, that you are this Marxist, you are this Ambedkarite, you are this and that. That I think we attach so much, demonize so much in differences. That I think is not a very good idea. And imagine that when you look, when the debate takes place, so in this here, you could see that there were the Vedantics were there. There are Lokayat was there. You know, there are so many schools of thought. So many schools of thought were there. And so I think that the art of listening, art of conversation, which is very important.
Thank you so much, sir. I hope Mehak has got her answer. And now the last but not the least, Anjali has asked something. And she has asked that happiness can be related to sociological problems and their solutions. Finland ranked #1 in happiest country of the world 2021. What do you think is different over there as compared to India? How can India be #1 in happiness?
I don't know. I can't comment much on the happiness index about to what extent you could measure it and all that happiness index. But what I feel that both in the life of the individual and in the life of the nation or the collective, if we think of it, I believe that in the life of an individual, of you and me, when we see as an individual, possibly, as I would see, that happiness is about your inner fulfillment, and happiness is your ability to see the extraordinary in the ordinary, you know. And happiness is not something that has a price tag, you know. So it's like saying that you fall in love with somebody and you are meeting your friend, beloved, and suddenly in the process of going, you just saw a beautiful leaf in the spring falling from the tree in a very beautiful rhythmic way, and you take that leaf and you give that leaf as a gift to your beloved, to your friend, you know. And there is a tremendous, that gift is so beautiful, and the person who receives that gift, in that leap, that person finds the extraordinary. The extraordinary is not the nakshatra diamond jewelry. You know, that is what the market has told us, you know. So, and those who could get it, they find that moment of happiness in a simple leaf falling from the tree, you know. Now, I think that happiness is that ability to see the extraordinary in the ordinary. And that's why we often see that your grandma has made a beautiful sweet dish at home and has just given you, and you take it. That is so beautiful, that is so deep, that is so meaningful, that, you know, the no five-star hotel cook at that moment you feel could make it, could do it. That's the moment, the ability to see the extraordinary in the ordinary, you know. And that, I think, we are essentially, the market has made us a very dark, very mad, violent horse, only racing and not finding it, because it cannot be found there. It has to be found here and now at that moment only. The way the Kabirs would say that, why are you searching it here and there? It is just here. It is here at this moment, you know. So I think that is in the life of the individual. And when you talk about in the life of the collective and the nation, there are certain material objective conditions which are necessary in the life of the nation so that the people could lead a more dignified living. And that requires a reasonable degree of economic equality and empowerment, certain kind of a egalitarian democratic cultural milieu, you know, where people could articulate, people could speak, people have their notion of freedom and expression, you know, and a society which to a great extent succeeded in fighting heightened life-killing inequality and exploitation. That society possibly would create an environment that would generate certain kind of surplus in the consciousness of the individual to lead a more meaningful, dignified, happy existence and the life.
Definitely, sir. I totally agree with you. It was a pleasure listening to you, sir. And at last, now it would be great if you can give a message to our teachers and to our students and society as general.
No, message to this is very strange thing. Give me a message. We are all working together. We are all co-travelers. We would learn from one another experience, you know. That is it. So there is no there is no message. Let all of us learn together, work together, unlearn together. Yes.
Okay, thank you so much, sir, for all your valuable advices. We will never forget what we learned today. Thank you very much.
Nana, nice talking to you. God bless you and take care. Stay safe. Best wishes. All the best. Thank you, Shashwat, for arranging it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. All the
Okay.
best.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.
All the best.